The ink that wrote itself. My grandmother left me 3 things when she died: a house that smelled of camphor and dried flowers, a debt she never mentioned, and a journal I was not supposed to open. The first 2 I understood. The house was old and needed work. The debt was manageable, but the journal sat on her writing desk, wrapped in a cloth the color of dried blood, and there was a note beneath it in her handwriting that said only, "Do not read what it writes on its own." I am a practical person. I teach secondary school mathematics. I believe in proofs. I do not believe in curses or warnings or cloth the color of dried blood. I unwrapped the journal on a Thursday evening while the rain came down outside in straight gray sheets, and I opened it to the first page. The pages were yellowed, but intact. The binding cracked softly. The handwriting inside, dense, looping, faded to the color of rust, was not my grandmother's. I closed it. Then I opened it again. The entries were dated going back to 1947. The first was short. "The man on the corner will not be there tomorrow. I wrote it last night, and this morning he was gone." The second, I wrote that the apple tree would split, and by noon it had. I did not write about the split. I only noticed it had already been written, page after page of the same careful record, not predictions exactly, but accounts. The writer, no name anywhere, was describing what the journal had written while they slept, finding the words in the morning that had not been there the night before. I read it all in one sitting. By the time I reached the final third of the entries, the tone had changed. The handwriting was shakier, the entries shorter. It wrote about my daughter. I tore the page out. 3 days later, the thing it described happened anyway. And then, I believe it does not cause these things. I believe it only sees them, but that does not make it easier to read. And finally, in the last entry dated August 1989, my grandmother's handwriting unmistakably, "My mother warned me. I did not listen. I have locked it in the desk. I will tell Vera not to open it, but Vera has never listened to me about anything important, and I suspect she will not start now. My name is Vera." I left the journal on the desk and went to bed. I told myself it was a relic, a family eccentricity, a record of coincidences dressed up in superstition. I am a mathematics teacher. I understand probability. I understand that the human mind finds patterns in randomness the way water finds low ground, inevitably, without intention. I lay in the dark in my grandmother's house and listened to the rain and thought about proofs. In the morning, I went to the desk before I made coffee. I told myself I was only going to close the journal properly, to put it away somewhere safe. But it was already open. I was certain, I am still certain, that I had closed it when I went to bed. It was open to a blank page near the back. And on that page, in ink so fresh it had not yet fully dried, something was written. The handwriting was neither my grandmother's nor the first writer's. It was mine. It looked exactly like mine. It had written one sentence. It had written, "She stood in the doorway for a long time before she could make herself look." I stood in the doorway for a long time before I could make myself look. I understand that this is the part of the story where I should have walked away, put the journal in a bag and thrown it in the river, called a priest, a therapist, a sensible friend. But I am a mathematics teacher, and mathematicians have a particular weakness. We want to understand the system. We want to know the rule. If the rule is that the journal writes true things, then the rule can be studied. If it can be studied, it can be known. And if it can be known, I told myself, it can be managed. I sat at the desk and I read the sentence again. Then I turned the page. The next page was blank. I went back to the same page and read it until I had memorized it, And then I began watching. I watched to see what had been predicted, but nothing unusual happened that morning. I made coffee, I ate toast, I walked through the house looking at things with the attention you give, a place that you have newly inherited and are only beginning to understand. By evening I had almost convinced myself it meant nothing. Then I found the room. It was behind a panel in the hallway, not hidden exactly, just papered over, the seam nearly invisible under 40 years of wallpaper. I found it, because the wall sounded wrong when I knocked, and I pulled at a loose corner of paper and the panel swung inward. Inside was a room the size of a large closet, a single chair, a small table, on the table a lamp, a jar of ink with the brush still in it, and 17 journals identical to the one on the desk, all of them open, all of them with writing I had not put there. I read them for 3 hours in that room. I will not recount everything I found. Some of it was historical, precise, verifiable, events dated and described with a specificity that left no room for coincidence. Some of it was personal, things about my family I had not known, could not have known, details about my grandmother's life that filled in silences she had kept for 60 years. And some of it, the newest entries, the ones that smelled of fresh ink, was about me, not my past, my future. I put the journals down. I did not read those pages to their end. I understand why. I want to be honest about that. I tell my students that running from a problem does not make it simpler. I tell them that ambiguity is not the same as impossibility. But there is a difference between a problem you can solve and a thing you can only witness. I have thought many times about what it would mean to know how a story ends before you have finished living it, whether it would be a gift, whether knowing the shape of what is coming would let you prepare, or whether it would simply replace the ordinary terror of the unknown with a more specific, unescapable one. I sealed the room. I put the original journal, the first one, the one my grandmother left me, in the cloth it had been wrapped in, and placed it at the back of a high shelf in a closet. I have not opened it since. Every morning when I come to this house, I have been staying here while I settle the estate, I check the desk. Sometimes there is nothing. Sometimes there is a sentence in my handwriting describing something small, a phone call I received that afternoon, a dream I will have that night. I have stopped reading them before they happen. I read them after, to confirm, to study the rule. The rule, as best I can determine, it writes only what is true. It does not write what might happen. It writes what will. Last week it wrote something longer, a paragraph. I read the first 2 sentences before I stopped. What I read was not terrible, not a catastrophe, not an ending. It described something private, a moment between me and a person I have not yet met, by a window I have not yet stood at, with light I cannot yet identify. It described it with the particular precision of someone who was there. It described it the way you remember something that mattered. I stopped reading because I found unexpectedly that I did not want to know. Not because I was afraid of what came next, but because I wanted to arrive there without a map. I wanted to be surprised. My grandmother warned me not to read what it writes on its own. I think I finally understand why. Some things are meant to be discovered, not known in advance. The ink writes the truth, but truth seen too early is just another kind of darkness. Thank you for listening to Storytime Scary Dark. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who might need it. Subscribe for new dark tales every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And I'll see you in the shadows.